I mean, if you can find a recipe, most of them say add an onion. But at the same time, like I did that and I could not get all my onions consumed before they went bad. So where does that leave you? You know what I mean? Like it's just it's insane to think about, but I'm glad that you kind of are having this I call it evolution. You know, it's the
Hmm.
evolution of the gardener, something that we've tried to talk about multiple times. And I think the only way to point it out is in each episode, but
Hmm.
you start getting it and I mean, you'll find it, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I know that you could chop up and freeze onions, right? You
Yeah.
you know that, but do you want to? That kind of goes back to last year coming into this year. I knew I had to have really a system, a process, what I'm harvesting, when I get it inside. And if I keep to that, I'll be on top of it. But I have greatly underestimated the work that it takes for me to get things processed.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of these things, like tomatoes are a good example. I see a lot of people harvest them, put them in the freezer, deal with them later. Now, there are a couple of dishes that I really like, and I want them to be with fresh tomatoes. And I just have to kind of give that up in some instances, right? It's better for me to have bags of tomatoes frozen than to lose a tomato on my dining room, table. Like that's like where I am with it. So I need to be realistic with the time that I expect to have. I need to be realistic with the things that I know I'll eat and how I'll eat them. And it's hard to actually predict that, but it's not impossible, right? And
Right.
I just have to give that some more attention because I know I'll be happier in my garden. And that's like hard stop. That's the goal.
Yeah. So, one that I want to bring, and I'm not going to bring this up anymore after this, because I've talked about it a lot, um, is my wild garden.
Mhm.
I saw it last year. I saw it struggle, and I saw it the year before struggle, and I should have taken the advice of old Martha Stewart and said, just rip it all out. But I went into the garden year, and Batavia, correct me if I'm wrong. I actually told you early in the year, like, hey, I'm thinking about pulling out the wild garden.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I wish that I would have taken a step back and pulled that out, because what ended up happening is I wasted time. I wasted my efforts. I wasted my money. I wasted a lot trying to get everything to do. I was trying to bend it to my will, and it just didn't really work out the way I wanted to. So, I've talked about it at length on YouTube and, on the podcast. I did it on the listeners episode. We talked about what we're planning to do over there. But the moral of the story is really just, hey, get this stuff out of there. Don't, if you see an issue like that, like if you see something where basically what was going on is the garden just wasn't really producing like we wanted to, it seemed to always struggle. The best period of time for production in it was from February into July. That was the best time. And when it came down to it, and I take a step back and think about it, well, that's the most sun that we get is during that period. We're coming out of winter. So typically winter plants take, cool season crops don't need as much sun. You could get away with 4 to 5 hours of sun versus, 6 to 8. So that's why those did good. And then you transfer over into the spring or into the summer crops. They would start out good, but they would eventually kind of die out. And we really, out of the 4 beds we had over there, only one of them actually would kind of hang in there. And even that one would kind of give out. So, over the years, I should have been more into it. This is kind of a culmination of all the years, but this year in particular, because as I looked at it and I watched it and I went into the season with it already in my mind that I wanted to get rid of it, I was like, I'm going to give it one more shot. I should have just done it, but at the same time, I had a lot of projects that were going on, and I just didn't have the time to kind of add that because moving the beds, filling the beds, and all that stuff. I had already added 2 beds last year. I was filling those. I was building irrigation for them. All that stuff. It was just too much. So I give myself a little bit of grace for that. But in the grand scheme of
Mhm.
things, man, just act on it,
Yeah.
because I could have done, I mean, essentially what I was working with in my garden was almost half the space that I was anticipating working with. And I always look at it when I'm planning my garden, I'm like, this is the year it's going to do great. And it just never really lived up to the expectations that we had set for it. So moving on, I'm no longer talking about this issue. I'm tired of talking about it, but it's a really important, I feel like it's really important to talk about, but it's just the horse is dead, and I even stomped on its head.
Hmm.
It's over. So
Yeah.
from here on out, we're only going to be talking about what's happening in that space now. But just know that if you see a space in your garden that doesn't look good, doesn't produce the way you want, just go ahead and get rid of it. And now's the time.
Hmm.
Now's the time to make that
Hmm.
plan.
Hmm.
So you've got months
Yeah.
to figure it out. So take advantage.
Yeah, for sure. If you don't want to get rid of it, even use it for something that's like less important. Let it rest. Like there are a couple of things that you can do. I think that when I look at kind of the last one, and I was trying to think about for all of these for you and I, are these things that we know going in? Like, do we know better, or
Yeah.
we're just not doing better? And so this last one for me, I think, is pretty simple. I touched on it, I think, in last week's episode. Like, I have a terrible. I mean, we've been talking about this for years. The leaving a thing in the ground on the plant too long, right? And so it's been isolated prior, like in our prior conversations around it. But I can look back over this year, and I have 4 or 5 garlic, sweet potatoes more recently. Let's see, regular white potatoes. These are all things that I can see evidence of when I harvested them that they should have been pulled weeks prior. And in almost all of those cases, I remember saying, maybe not the potatoes, but for the others, white potatoes. I Sweet potatoes, I remember for the garlic. I remember looking and saying, the carrots even, oh, I should go ahead and harvest those. And generally speaking, for some of these, there's not a whole lot of work once you pull them out of the ground. Like I can get back to my garlic when I've pulled them a week from now. I just need to make sure that there's some air circulating, right? So I put this thing off. This is the downside of making everything a project. And I've confirmed in my mind that it's not even about kind of gathering the content, because these are some of the things that I'm not even filming, right? It's just like I've just not stopped to get to it. Oh, it's raining. Let me let the soil dry. It's a couple of weeks later that I'm looking up, and I dug my sweet potatoes out the first week of November, which generally speaking, I have dug sweet potatoes out right before the frost, which would be like right at the end of October. And because I'm convinced that I don't have a really hot climate, I want to leave those in there as long as I can. I had signs. I think there were sweet potatoes like climbing out of the soil, like almost a month prior to that. And instead
Yeah.
of like letting the plants tell me what they wanted, I left them in there,
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think that it kind of ties back to, all right, how much time I have, but that also ties to, if I'm planting so many things where I can't make time to pull garlic much easier than digging up sweet potatoes, then I need to really make some cuts when it comes to what I'm growing.
Yeah. It's funny. We talk about these fails, and they they are all linked together.
Hmm.
When we go through it, it's like you know it's funny to me because every single one in each one of our gardens are all linked around a central theme, and I think that's what it's going to be most years, and it's just it's the way we plan, we work through our garden, and we do stuff like that.